Revenue generation, especially in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, is now more critical than ever for every nation across the world. The income capacity of countries is different, and competitive advantage is a large part of any country's success. Diversification has been a working model that has boosted the coffers of many. We're seeing more and more African states focusing on diversifying their economies. That diversification has probably never been as important as now, post-COVID. In Africa's largest economy, has been argued that government has no business in business. Analysts have said that policy, regulation, and infrastructure should be handled by the government, leaving the management of the economy to the private sector. There are many who are advocating for government to hands off the private sector, create an enabling environment, and let those who understand business run the economy. For the largest economy on the continent, with a population of over 200 million people, a 2.2% GDP growth rate, and decreasing and fluctuating oil revenue, Nigeria must address its revenue challenges. Today, we're looking at improving Nigeria's revenue drive. I'm Tolulokwe Adileru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me today, I have Taiwo Oyedele. He's the Fiscal Policy Partner and Africa Tax Leader for PricewaterhouseCoopers. I also have Gbolahan Olojade. He's the Executive Director, DMA Advisory and Management Services Limited. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, Taiwo, let me start with you. This concept that government has no business in business is one that we hear very often. It seems more people want to relegate the government to a supervisory role. But here on the continent, we see a lot of African governments who have their hands, their feet, and every other thing involved in business. So I'll ask you, what's government's role when it comes to business?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I know that cliche has been around for as long as we can remember. And I think it's true, if not for anything based on empirical evidence. The role of government is essentially to regulate and to facilitate. So government should create the enabling environment for businesses to thrive, and then regulate to ensure that things are done properly, that rules are followed, things to do with safety, things to do with proper governance, and just holding the whole system to account. So America produces more than 10 million barrels of crude oil a day, far more than 5 times what we produce in Nigeria. America does not have a national oil company. And we know America is making more money from oil than we can even think of making in 10 years, just in 1 year. So the whole idea of government wanting to run business, I think is outdated. Whether you're talking about airlines, whether you're talking about refining, whether you're talking about even running, the rail system, I think government should confine themselves into just regulating and facilitating businesses, and then getting involved in activities that are not commercially viable. So for example, if you need to provide free education, so the private sector won't do that because they like to make money. So that is what the role of government should be, in my view. And I think this is supported by evidence around the world.
As he thinks this model of government is particularly outdated. And when that comes into play, there are those who said because Nigeria is a developing economy, or other economies on the continent are developing economies, it might be a stage that the country has to go through. Gbolahan, what do you think about this? Does Nigeria's government in particular have any business in business?
It should not be the business of the government to put hands and legs into operations of businesses in Nigeria. And the evidences are all over the open. You can hardly point to any government enterprise that is making money. Everybody knows about NLNG, for example. NLNG is paying dividend, is making money. But why is it making money? It is not owned substantially by government. It is operated by the private sector partners of that institution. And that is what is making money. The rest are not making any money. So it is clear that government has no business in business. Create the right environment, regulate, and let the private sector do what they know how to do best. Operate those businesses.
Okay,
This
so Bola,
is the right thing.
so let me stay with you in that regard. So at a recent Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry webinar that was held in collaboration with PwC, Taiwo also talked about letting the private sector handle things such as rails, refinery, port operations, things that are commercially viable. And I get that from the example you've shared using the LNG project. So they would be able to do this better than government and pay taxes. And taxes are a large part of revenue generation. But we're seeing that Nigeria is struggling in this regard. Nigeria has one of the lowest tax to GDP ratios on the continent. We are working on increasing our tax base and bringing in more money from taxes. But this also comes at a time when the average Nigerian is poorer. Purchasing power is less. It has decreased. There's more poverty in the land. Is there a compromise to be had between government's needs concerning taxes and what it can do for the general population versus what citizens can afford to give to government in terms of taxes?
Sorry, I missed a part of that discussion, some network issues.
So towards the end, I was just asking if there's a compromise to be had between what government needs in terms of taxes and what citizens can afford to give right now.
Okay, government needs taxes, but there are several issues with that part about the accountability for existing tax situations, about the efficiency of collection, even from the existing tax base. And then we can go into the issue of organizations like government enterprises that are running in billions of losses every year. And we continue to pour money down the drain every year. Who does that? If this refinery, for example, was somebody's business, will he continue to pour billions into it and be making losses every year? And that is the same thing we see around with government enterprises. If we shift this over to the private sector, then they can run it more efficiently and government can take benefit of the taxes. Take Nitel and the GSM, other telcos, for example. For like 50 years, Nitel could not even muster 1 million subscribers for 50 years. And we saw what has happened since the private sector came into that place. And we saw how government has continued to make income in taxes from telcos and all the ancillary businesses that come along with that. This is the same thinking we should take into several other sectors of the economy because it is possible.
All right, so Taiwo, let me come to you. This is your area of specialization. Now, the tax conversation is one that is ongoing across the continent, but Nigeria is the largest economy on the continent, yet has one of the lowest tax to GDP ratios on the continent as well. Not even in the double digits, we're hovering around that 6%, when there are other countries across the continent that are in 28, in the 30 percentile of this conversation. What does Nigeria need to do to turn around its tax conversation? Because it's going to be ongoing. You're having a high poverty rate, you're having unemployment. So the people who should be working and paying taxes are unable to do so. How do we change this?
Yeah. So I think, just to start from where you stopped with the previous question, every country on earth has to strike a balance in terms of compromise between what government wants in revenue and what the people can afford. So as of today, the global average debt to GDP ratio worldwide is over 200%. That's to tell you that every country is borrowing, including the United States of America, has significant debt. They would rather raise all of that in taxes, even though they already generate a lot of money, over $6 trillion across all levels of government in the US, but it's still not enough. So in other words, you need to strike a balance. Now, coming to your second question, so the tax morale in Nigeria is very low, and understandably so. So when you have to take care of yourself, from providing electricity to water to security in your estate where you live, you're lucky to live in one, and the list continues. you find it extremely difficult to then part with your hard-earned money in taxes. Layered over that is the fact that you read in the news every day millions and billions and sometimes trillions of naira that are being stolen away by people we charge with the management of our resources. These things are very, I have to be honest, it's very difficult to continue to pay your taxes when you have these narratives around. So what government needs to do first and foremost is to understand how these things work. Right, you need to address one, cost efficiency. Should you be borrowing to rehabilitate a refinery at very high cost when you have other priorities, a project that private sector can do better? Should you be borrowing to build projects that are not immediately of importance to the people when there are issues to do with education and human capital development, and millions of Nigerians don't even have access to water? Now, if you can address cost efficiency, and then you demonstrate accountability in the use of the little money you are collecting, then you begin on the path of getting more people to want to pay. On top of that also is the need for enforcement, the use of data and intelligence. What you find in Nigeria is that actually people that are paying taxes the most are people that shouldn't be paying at all. They should have been exempted. The minimum wage, people who are earning 50,000 naira per month and paying PAYE. And then you find that a lot of the middle class and the upper class get away with it, either legitimately by making sure they influence all the incentives, or they just don't care because they know nobody will come after them. So we're still saying, as of yesterday and the day before, this conversation about the Senate proposing an amendment to the Constitution to make it easier for us to create more states. The United States of America has 50 states as of today. In the past 109 years, they've only created 2 states. New York, California, Washington, D.C., each of these states control more than $100 billion in revenue annually. They're not thinking of creating more states. Nigeria, federal, and all the states, our budget is under $50 billion, and we can't even fund it without borrowing. Yeah. It just goes against all common sense that we should be thinking of creating more states at this time. That will raise the cost of governance.
All right, so Taiwo, let's hold on. I like that both of my guests have mentioned refining, because crude oil is a major conversation piece when it comes to Nigeria's revenue generation. And we also have to talk about the elephant in the room, which is also the issue of borrowing and loans. Improving Nigeria's revenue generation drive is our topic today. This is Business Edge. We'll take a quick time out. There's more right after this. Taiwo Oyedele of PwC and Gbolahan Oloyede of DMA Advisory and Management Services are still with me. And gentlemen, let's get into an area you've both sort of taken us to with some of your answers today already. And let's talk about the elephant in our room, and that's crude oil. Nigeria's oil and gas sector represents more than 65% of government revenues, and the sector accounts for about 10% of gross domestic product. However, the agricultural sector actually employs more Nigerians and has not received the attention it deserves. We're also seeing a world that is moving away from fossil fuels. Oil revenue from this area has taken a hit over the past few years, and more so because of the lockdowns during the COVID crisis as well. This avenue of revenue generation has come under immense pressure. Now, Nigeria must prepare for a post-oil world. Gbolahan, let me start with you. How do we continue to improve generation in this area, but also prepare for a future where crude oil is not going to bring in as much as it has been bringing in? And both you and Taiwo have mentioned that you necessarily do not agree with the idea of the government spending billions of dollars to rehabilitate refineries that have not been working for a number of years when the private sector can do that. Gbolahan.
Okay. Our counterparts across the world, what they are doing right now is trying to get as much as possible of those oil and gas resources that are underground onto assets that are above the ground that will continue to yield revenue for the country, even when oil itself has become a less profitable venture to go into. So, which is why we're missing a whole lot by allowing a PIB to stay in the National Assembly since 2008. And as at now, we still have not signed it into law. So we must be able to bring as much as possible of those resources from under the ground and convert them now that it still has some value. It's not as if it would disappear in 2 or 3 years, that it's still going to be here for some years ahead. So let's realize that it will fizzle out after a while and then plan for how to continue to benefit from it after it has fizzled out. Then the other part is, what do we need to do to start doing as far as diversification of the economic base is concerned? Agric is a good one, no doubt about that, because we have what it takes to do agric. We have the arable land, we have water, we have all it takes to do it. So by all means, let's be able to do agriculture. But we must realize that there is practically no developed nation in the world that lives on primary agricultural product. It doesn't happen. We are never going to be a wealthy country if what we rely on is primary agricultural product. Agric begins to have value when we are able to add value to it. So the production sector has to be robust so that we don't produce cocoa, sell it to Netherlands, then the Nestle that is behind my door at Agbara will now go to St. Netherlands to go and import the chocolate. We need to address all those issues. Then we must begin to focus on the service side of things. When you look at the report from MBS and you see how the role that telecoms is playing, it behoves on us. There's a call on us to do more in the area of services. I've been asking myself as of today, why is it that we don't have a state that will say, let me create a technology hub? Maybe something like trying to recreate the Silicon Valley that you have in the United States, and begin to produce, say, programmers for the entire West African sub-region. If we do those kind of things, we would, number one, we would develop human capital, we would produce services, and we will earn foreign exchange. We need to begin to look in that direction, apart from adding value to primary production, which is a very important part to diversifying the economy.
All right, so I'm taking a few things away from you, Bolahan. We're looking at the value chain, of course, which is a further conversation than just our Greek agriculture. That's a conversation for the entire continent, but also in being deliberate and intentional about our actions. So Taiwo, let's talk about the other elephants in the room when it comes to revenue generation, and that's where does this money go when it comes in? For Nigeria, a lot of it is going right now into debt servicing. The debt service to revenue ratio for the period of January to May 2020 stood at about 98%, up from 83% recorded in 2020, and this is according to the Budget Implementation Report. Nigeria's public debt is about 33.107 trillion naira, or around $87.239 billion. And as you said earlier, every country takes loans. Every country has debt. Even the United States, even China, they have these things. But the situation for a country like Nigeria, where revenue has decreased, is a very worrying situation. Is there a middle ground? Is there a solution to this situation right now as Nigeria finds itself regarding revenue generation and the debt that's taking that revenue when it comes in?
Yeah, you're right. So every country borrows. So borrowing in and of itself is not a problem. So the problem is whether you're able to keep up with the terms of your borrowing. And to a large extent, your debt to GDP ratio is not something to worry about. But you should be concerned about your debt service cost to your revenue. So there are countries that are close to 100% debt to GDP ratio, and nobody worries about them. And Nigeria is still under 40%. And we're all concerned, and that's because our revenue profile is pretty low. We're borrowing to pay debt servicing costs. We're borrowing to pay recurrent expenditure. We're literally borrowing to pay salaries. Those are not self-financing costs, which means if we don't do anything urgently, if we don't begin to act differently, we'll get into a debt trap, which we have no more option other than to keep borrowing, and we get to a point where we can no longer pay back We start printing naira, we're already printing. We print more naira, and we get to a point where naira will become completely useless. We've seen that happen to Zimbabwe. We pray that that doesn't happen, but I think we need more than prayers. We need to take concrete steps. So what we need to do again is to look at cost efficiency. Are there things we're spending money on that we don't need to? Are there areas where we can try and be more creative in how we spend money? Can we get every naira we spend to be as productive as possible? Can we get private sector to partner with government to fund viable projects? And can we begin to be more even transparent about our debt profile? So as of today, Ways and Means, which is essentially the CBN financing, is over 13 trillion naira and it's not included. We have government agencies that are owing and those debts are not included. We need to first be honest. Let's aggregate everything. Let's know the problem we have. And then let's begin the conversation as to how do we address this over the short to medium and more importantly, the long term. I would understand that in the immediate term, maybe we have no choice, not many options other than to borrow, but we must begin to build that foundation today so that these narratives will be different in a few years from now.
All right, so I think, Taiwo, that's a conversation we'll have to come back to you on, and that is how Nigeria can avoid this debt trap. We're seeing the signs ahead of us. We're seeing, unfortunately, these milestones or markers that Nigeria is passing towards that trap. But there are some things we can do to walk back. Gentlemen, I will have to wrap up, but before I do that, I like the fact that we have been speaking about solutions, and I want to give each of you 30 seconds to quickly give me solutions. Gbolahan, you've mentioned about the agricultural value chain. You've also mentioned about states being competitively advantageous, maybe deciding to create a Silicon Valley for themselves. In 30 seconds, give me your top priorities. How can Nigeria improve her generation, her revenue generation drive in terms of being deliberate and intentional about it?
I think for me, we need to be able to drive our taxes up. And the only way we're ever going to be able to do that is, number one, to ensure that we are more accountable and transparent as to the use of the existing tax level. Number two, to improve on the efficiency of collection of existing tax base. So what we already have, let's be able to collect. And then number three is to improve on the environment that will make tax. People want to pay more taxes. I only pay taxes for making money. I only have more disposable income if little things like water, security, road, if I don't have to burn all my money on it, then I will have enough to pay tax.
All right.
When we do all of this, we'll get more taxes from the people.
All right. So, Taiwo, same to you. 30 seconds. Priorities, intentional, deliberate action. We're getting money in, that's no doubt. But obviously, this money is also not staying in our coffers because it's being spent on other things. And there are questions about priorities. In 30 seconds, how does Nigeria address all of this?
Yeah, I'll say three things. Number one is the need for reform to the tax system, starting with multiple taxation. We have over 100 different taxes in Nigeria today. Less than 10% of those taxes account for about 98% of our revenue. A lot of the others are being collected by non-state actors. We saw the report about Agberos in Lagos collecting more than, bottom 30 states in Nigeria. We need to stop that, and that has to start from the legal reform, constitution, and all of that. Number two is the utilization of the tax revenue. That has to be efficiently utilized, and we have to account for it. And number three is we must use data and intelligence. It doesn't matter whether your money is legitimate or not. All over the world, you pay the taxes first, and then we ask you questions later. Until we get to this point, nothing is going to change.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. I do know this is your first time on Business Edge, but I look forward to having the two of you back. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. My guest today, Taiwo Oyedele, Fiscal Policy Partner in Africa, Tax Leader for PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Gbolahan Oloyede, Executive Director, DMA Advisory and Management Services Limited. I look forward to having them again on Business Edge. Before we wrap things up, here are a few stories we're keeping our eyes on. The new frontier is braving the odds and sourcing for more funds. And as such, the international financial markets have opened a window for African governments to diversify their funding sources from traditional multilateral funding sources to others. And we have in this development, African nations are now borrowing through issuing euro bonds. These are international bonds issued by a country in a foreign currency, usually in dollars or euros. South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, and Nigeria have sought and are seeking new euro bonds to raise new liquidity. The Nairobi Securities Exchange has recorded a 33.5% decline in equity turnover in July 2021. This means that it dipped billions from 19.95 billion in June to 9.3 billion Kenyan shillings in 2021. According to the Barometer, a monthly bulletin published by the stock exchange, bonds turnover also declined by 0.9%. Number 3 on our list, the appointment of new South African finance minister is believed to be hinged on his status with the ruling party, and that could help to build alliances for the fiscal policies championed by the National Treasury. And this is coming from Fitch Ratings analyst Jan Frederick. Now, the new finance minister, a former labor unionist and close political ally of President Cyril Ramaphosa, was named finance chief in a cabinet shakeup last Thursday after Tito Mboweni resigned. He is the ruling African National Congress's head of economic policy and a former deputy minister of public enterprises and of economic development. And finally, Dangote Sugar Refinery, owned by Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, plans to spend $1 billion on expansion. This decision comes after Nigeria's central bank made Dangote Sugar Refinery one of the 3 sole importers of the sweetener into Africa's largest economy. The company has put more than 100,000 hectares of land under cultivation to grow sugarcane for local sourcing of input. And that's something we'll be watching very closely. Those are a few stories we have for you that we're keeping our eyes on NC4 to watch. There is, of course, more. You can meet us on YouTube, subscribe and follow us. And, of course, check up on any of our fascinating conversations on business and economic issues here on the continent. Download our mobile app on your App Store and Play Store and take us with you wherever you go. And, of course, watch us live on Star Times Channel 274. I'm Tolulokwe Adelari Balogun. I'll see you again next time.